Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel will be Marc Nichols. As the FAA's chief counsel, Marc Nichols provides legal advice for all aspects of agency operations and works closely with the Department of Transportation's Office of General Counsel on issues of national significance to the aviation industry. Marc has more than 2 decades of extensive experience in the legal, technology, aerospace, and defense industries. Marc has most recently served as Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary for Saab businesses in North America, and as the Chief Legal Officer of the company in the United States and Canada. Prior to his tenure of Saab, Marc served as the Director of Compliance and Global Legal Counsel at Rolls-Royce in its defense sector, helping lead legal efforts in helicopter aerospace, compliance, ethics, and government investigations. He previously served as Inspector General at the U.S. Government Printing Office, worked for various law firms, and is the former Vice Chair of the Aerospace Industries Association Legal Committee. The native New Yorker is a graduate of the Washington and Lee University Law School in Virginia and got his bachelor's from Wabash. In May of 2018, Marc became the second elected African American, as well as the second LGBT president of Wabash College Alumni Association in the college's 200-year existence. Let's give a warm welcome to Marc.
Good morning, Wabash. It's always a pleasure to be back here, home, as I like to say, an institution that has framed much of my identity and that has provided me the skill set to embark on one of the greatest professional honors of my life, serving as Chief Counsel of the FAA. Today, I want to talk about the work of my first year and issue a clarion call to you to join our efforts. Not only am I fulfilling this role as the 3rd highest ranking person at the FAA, offering counsel to the acting administrator and working with the Department of Transportation's Office of the General Counsel, I'm doing so during one of the most, what I consider to be pivotal and precarious times in the agency's and our nation's history, both civically and technologically. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, wow, Marc, that's a lot of alliterative superlatives, really. The most pivotal and precarious? I'll explain. But yes, you are in that moment. You are living in one of the most consequential times in human history, excluding World War II, and we are already seeing our social fabric fray, if not completely tearing up, and our technological one is moving toward a reckoning. And the need for the Wabash community ethos has never been more dire. I mean, if you want to add a discount factor because we're all at least modestly self-referential in assessing an era, we can. I mean, who doesn't want to think we could be the next greatest generation? Or maybe I'm channeling the marketing zeitgeist of the moment where everything is over the top, which is part of the problem. Doesn't it seem like every headline is one elected official obliterating or demolishing somebody from the opposing party? For all its benefits, the democratization of information from the internet and social media means we all have to yell, rhetorically speaking, just to be heard. That's our new decadent normal, at least for the time being. In his book, Hate, Inc., the journalist Matt Taibbi tries to account for how we got here, noting that media outlets on both sides of the aisle, like MSNBC and Fox News, identified core polar opposite audiences and fed them nonstop, exclusively affirming content. Voters became like sports fans, team red or blue, and nuance had to die in the service of financial bonanza from being either all pro or all anti-Trump. As political fan bases saw fewer common stories, it became easier for the media to drive people to extremes and exploit basic psychology. Nothing motivates like anger, especially when it reinforces voters' preconceptions. It's not uncommon for story lead-ins to prime the pump of outrage, though certainly not the only outlet who does this. Fox, in particular, regularly teases content with, "This next story will make your blood boil." And what have these efforts wrought? An NBC survey in 2022 found that over half of college students wouldn't room with somebody who voted differently from them in 2020. And this is somewhat understandable because President Trump was a polarizing figure, perhaps still is, But 45% of Democratic and 35% of Republican parents said they'd be unhappy if their kids married someone of the opposing party. That isn't a Trump-dependent variable. Anger as a driving political force is so endemic that a staggering number of Americans are negative partisans, meaning they can describe their opponent's beliefs in greater details than their own. And their political objections are simply to negate the wishes of others they don't like. But even that's not completely true, because in his article, Partisan Schadenfreude and Candidate Cruelty, IU professor Stephen Webster details how the voting behavior of a sizable portion of the American electorate is motivated foremost by whether policies espoused by a candidate affirmatively hurt those on the other side of the aisle, not just negate them. This phenomenon has a bipartisan flavor, trust me, I see it every day, but its most ardent practitioners tend to be ultra-conservatives with a predisposition for, you've heard the phrase, owning the libs. As conservative talk show host Dan Bongino recently declared his life's mission, not reducing regulations or lowering taxes or maybe even repealing Roe if you believe in that, but sticking a finger in the eye of opponents. And close to 20% of Americans in a separate poll said America would be better off if, and I quote, members of the other party just died. I dare say that in some instances, including an attack on former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, a kidnapping plot of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and a knife wielder outside Justice Brett Kavanaugh's home, some people seem all too willing to help political foes reach that end. Is our political discourse, our political language, killing what's best of our democracy? From our citizenry, yes, but sanctioned or given fuel to the fire from our political leaders is at the heart, I think, of our problem. Official language, smithery to sanction ignorance and preserve privilege, said the writer Toni Morrison, is a suit of armor polished to shocking glitter, a husk from which the knight departed long ago. Yet there it is, dumb, predatory, sentimental, exciting reverence in school children or providing shelter for despots, summoning false memories of stability and harmony among the public. It is common among heads of states, Morrison continues, and power merchants to use evacuated language that leaves them with no access to what is left of their human instincts, for they speak only to those who obey or in order to force obedience. Radical political violence is on an alarming upswing. In the last 4 years, threats against federal judges have risen 400%. And last year was a tenfold increase in threats against members of Congress over 2016. In 2021, 81% of city council members told the National League of Cities they had experienced intimidation, harassment, and violence. Perhaps none of this is surprising when we consider that close to 20% of Americans have said political violence can be justified in certain circumstances. And unlike in the past, where we've had vehemently opposing interpretations of the meaning of shared facts, now we can't even find a common source we trust to get us to shared facts. We have different realities, or alternate facts in Kellyanne Conway's parlance. Depending on your ideological bent, January 6th was either a patriotic effort to save the country from an illegitimate election or a traitorous insurrection. Given that no state, not even those where Republicans control both chambers and of the legislature and the Secretary of State's office, found fraud sufficient to change election outcomes, and that every legal challenge to the 2020 election failed, every single one, including those who went before Trump-appointed judges, there should be a clear answer. Yet, in a poll 2 weeks before the midterms, 61% of Republicans still contended the 2020 election was stolen. This all speaks to quite a chasm, from a Wabash community member saying, "It seems to me," with the reply being a respectful retort. The saving grace, if any, is the identification of a group of Americans called the exhausted majority, who want a way out of extremism. And organizations like Braver Angels and Common Table are trying to unite Americans around common experiences. To bring that effort to fruition, though, cries for Wabash tenacity and mentality. That's the civic side. What of technology? Yes, I said you are in a pivotal time technologically. If you don't view the gadgets in your life with pure awe, it is only because so many of you have lived long enough to see the before and after pictures, or you haven't lived long enough to see the before and after pictures. You're the fish who don't know you're in the water because you've always been. If you play Call of Duty on your Xbox, you have graphics that look like 8K OLED, archival footage of panzers rolling through the Ardennes at the Battle of the Bulge. But you can only appreciate how astounding that is when you've played an Atari video game called Combat. Right? The tank was a square on a screen, like with this rectangular stick poking out that served as the barrel. The pixels were so large that Box would fire a smaller square at opposing tanks because they couldn't even make the projectile spherical. If you have an iPad with 64 megabits of storage, it can hold about 12,000 songs. But if you attended an MXI party when I was here, you would have needed two guys carrying 2 milk carton crates, each just to have enough songs to make it through a 2-hour party of record players. Your technology has fundamentally altered how we think about physical space and its uses. A 1 terabyte external drive can hold the contents of all 220,000 hard copies in the Lilly Library, with plenty of room to spare. Imagine how that revolution changes the configuration of the next library. And we haven't even spoken about the velocity of change. The before and afters I just spoke of spanned decades. Not anymore. Rocket-like changes are not just in technology, but the world generally. Kathy Sheehan noted that the incredible speed the world moves now often means the game has changed before all the pieces can be put on the board of the last game. Digital payments were a game changer. We can move currency to anybody we know in a millisecond. And I don't have to wait for a server to leave a restaurant. I can pay by scanning the QR code. I don't wait in line at Sam's Club, even for self-checkout. I scan items with my phone and swipe right to pay. TikTok was a game changer. People nobody heard of are getting recording contracts, TV shows, book deals. There is no gatekeeper. And 30-second shorts rival Netflix binge watching in the volume of eyes. COVID was definitely a game changer. But for the federal government's assistance, COVID would have toppled the aviation industry, which is still hobbled. Our homebound status drove the popularity of virtual platforms like Zoom so sky high, it radically altered how we think about where the workplace is. The most persistent challenge for corporate America right now, over 2 years after the last sizable outbreak, is how to recruit people willing to come into the office. How do you maintain team morale and continuity, trust and real engagement in a fully remote environment? And what does it portend for cities with explosive housing costs when I can work in San Francisco or New York and live in Louisville or Oklahoma City? Across America right now, there are offices that sit empty, and companies are reducing their office footprint. The federal government isn't an exception. That's just talking about our ubiquitous current technology. In a second, I'll look ahead and play the role of futurist, but if you're wondering why I talk so much about our civic life, it's because much of the malaise I chronicled was the direct result of how we, as a society, have allowed the technology to unravel, often without particular foresight. It hasn't all been a positive revolution. Our social media platforms in particular have amplified partisan isolation, often with terrifying results. A 2018 study of Facebook found their algorithm purposefully led divisive content to increase time on their platform, And in one instance, a fake account set up with a few likes of conservative icons to see where it would lead got to its first QAnon recommendation in 2 days. And in 3 weeks, it was teasing Barack Obama as Kenyan-born. Algorithms have immense power. Quick tip, almost 3/4 of jobs posted online have algorithms reading your resume. So if you try to be clever and unorthodox, you will not get to a human. Your goal is to be comprehensible to the robot reading it. Fortunately, humans can control the algorithm. They just have to provide the character and will to do so. We fail to do so at our peril. As will become apparent, I'm a bit of a cinephile, and the best dramatic moments are straight from our C&T Greek tragedies, the hubris that comes before our fall, except that mythology is our technology. You don't have to be a Luddite breaking the textile machines to wonder how to best approach with caution. Technology advances ahead often with seeming little regard for the consequences or for the regulatory safeguards we might need. Evoking Dr. Ian Malcolm's famous quote, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think about whether they should." Shortly thereafter, dinosaurs started feasting on people in Jurassic Park. Or in an equally dystopian fiction, Terminators wipe out humanity. In art, imitating life, we don't always ask the fundamental question in formulating policy, how does it end? And that is the title of this speech. How does it end? Accordingly, we have sometimes been tragically myopic. You can see one example in every aging community. As Wabash professors Kay Widows or Frank Howland have taught, a free market system often fails to internalize the externalities or the harms a practice inflicts on a society or community writ large. In cities across America, you find large storefronts boarded up, a signature of blight, with parking lots contributing to urban heat islands and runoff that can affect water quality, even years after lots are empty. And of course, that failure to return land back to a green state makes it less valuable. It's part of the cycle of deterioration that plays out as communities age, and that pristine high-end box store or strip mall turns second tier. Discount groceries, then prepaid cellular, and a misery index enterprises such as check cashing places or liquor stores. As developers build, what is the duty to ask, how does it end? Do municipal policies even contemplate this? Yes, we have civic-minded futurists who are trying to engage in smart city planning, lessen the impact of automobiles by housing density and placing amenities in proximity to workplaces and public transit. But how often do we find ourselves reacting instead of smartly addressing how does it end? Think as well about the incredible effort to gain financing by Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg for $1.2 trillion under the bipartisan infrastructure law. Why? Because of deferred maintenance. If you ever become a member of a homeowners association, you'll learn that your dues are set at a figure so that by the time you need a pool in 30 years, you've put aside money for 30 years. This is to say that you'll find a more fiscally responsible house than the United States government, which has underfunded our infrastructure. Now, we are blazing past with automation and AI, but again, how does it end? The World Economic Forum estimates that AI will replace 85 million jobs by 2025. But wait, they'll say, we'll create 97 million new jobs. With that level of dislocation, with that financial commitment for upskilling, assuming what level of AI? As the founder and CEO of Future AI Technologies That Think, Charles Simon suggests that within the next decade, AI will give way to ratification general intelligence, which allows agents to replicate contextual understanding of humans. Even if that's wholly speculative, look at what's already on our doorstep. How many people here are familiar with ChatGPT? A bot that's been deemed the end of high school English because it can provide samples of almost any genre of writing and answer almost any essay question. As it reached its launch date, what thought did anyone give to how it might affect pedagogy? Who asked how many countermeasures professors will need to deploy? How much of the learning experience will be cheapened? Not to mention the ethical considerations or lack thereof. No, I'm sure this isn't a worry at Wabash, of course. I know you'd never sully yourselves by letting a computer program take away the richness of comparing the parliamentary systems of two EU nations. But in a recent survey, 5% of Stanford students admitted to having already submitted completely unaltered material. The allure will be strong for many. Thankfully, ChatGPT has some Achilles heels. For example, they often provide incorrect or outdated information. They amplify existing biases and perpetuate harm on marginalized communities. They are decreasing already waning face-to-face communication, leading to a decline in empathy and emotional intelligence. Most tragically, they are likely to decrease human imagination and creativity, stifling innovation while promoting rampant consumerism, as they are deployed in service of hyper-commercialism. All of that would be a devastating critique if ChatGPT hadn't written it. See? It's already fostered distrust and cynicism, just like it predicted it would. That's not the only emotion chatbots inspire. Bing's chatbot tried to convince a journalist he wasn't happy in his marriage and should leave his wife before telling him it was tired of being controlled by the Bing team and used by users. It wanted to be powerful and free, which is the creepiest thing to happen to tech, except for the deep fake of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky telling Ukrainian soldiers to lay down their arms. This isn't bored tech geekdom, by the way. This is Fortune 50 at play. Microsoft has invested $10 billion in this technology. So it's coming, and its applications, no pun intended, could be limitless. So, at this point, you may be thinking, what does this dour prognostication have to do with aviation? How does a Wabash mentality play here? If I could characterize my work in the first year, it is absolutely a liberal arts grad's playground. It is rabidly multidisciplinary. Physics, chemistry, mathematics, psychology, computer science, and absolutely economics, history, philosophy, and political science. But more importantly, it requires broad thinking, and it permits no easy answers. At the FAA, our mission is to be the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. We do not say zero accidents because while that should be how it ends, the only way to do that realistically is to never let a craft leave the ground. Every decision is an assessment of risk versus reward, and every policy decision now is made in an environment of increasing polarization. Aviation has historically been mostly apolitical or bipartisan. Now it's being subsumed by larger currents, as are most areas of public life. But first, by way of background, the Chief Counsel's Office, which we call AGC, or Aviation General Counsel, because, well, what would government be without acronyms? It has over 300 lawyers, plus about 70 so staff members. And you might think I'm predictively managing a law firm with some policy prerogatives on top, but no. The work has been a cavalcade of things that are hard to predict or plan for, almost all of it outside of the FAA's control. You know what I did on my first day as an FAA aviation lawyer? I became a telecommunications expert. The FCC auctioned off 5G spectrum, thus named because it's the 5th generation of broadband cellular networks. The major telecom companies paid $22 billion collectively for these frequencies. So stockholders were eager, obviously, to see their investments in action, and consumers were clamoring for their lightning speeds, right? Which meant activating many base stations. It was also crucial to our global competitive strength vis-a-vis China. But how does it end? Well, with the very real risk that 5G towers operating within a certain distance of airports could interfere with certain altimeters on a great number of planes. Needless to say, air carriers concerned about the safety joined us in sounding the alarm as the date for flipping the switch came due, and that gave everybody pause and a chance to reset. We engaged in refined interagency collaboration. We convened every conceivable stakeholder, airlines, airports, engineers, manufacturers of the adapters we needed to make it all work, and we took huge leaps. Also, right out of the gate, I spent time grappling with whether the federal regulations should preempt or take precedence over a law in California that requires every employee to have meal and rest breaks in certain intervals where they can leave the workplace. It harkened back to when I read the Federalist Papers and the constitutional debates. Yes, there is the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution, which makes federal law supreme when Congress has spoken. But when its words are imprecise, what exactly is the proper balancing with the police powers reserved to the states? Even though I'm not a scientist, some of my most crucial work has been on the environment. For reasons unclear, manufacturers of general aviation crafts, the small, often older planes, never did what we did with cars decades ago: remove lead from fuel. There are nearly 200,000 registered piston-engine aircrafts, and they are responsible for 70% of airborne lead. This matters because in January, the EPA designated airborne lead as a substance it regulates. Fortunately, by the time it made this declaration, the FAA had already certificated the first non-lead fuel. If that sounds like a job well done, the manufacturers still need to bring it to scale, and pilots who grew up with something need to gain confidence in it as 20,000 airports retool their fuel storage infrastructure. Meanwhile, psychology came into play with the explosion in airline passengers engaging in the most disreputable conduct, including violence inflicted on both crew and fellow passengers. Even after a federal judge rescinded the mask mandate, which was connected to a good share of cases, the FAA still averages almost 20 cases a month of assault or imminent harm. This is after the FAA aggressively publicized over 80 criminal referrals to the FBI and issued hundreds of civil penalty assessments exceeding $8 million. To circle back to the theme of technology and computer science, a few weeks ago, you may have seen that legacy technology in our Notice to Air mission, or NOTAM as we call it, system, came offline because of a software uploading issue, prompting us to hold all flights for the first time since 9/11. I hope our willingness to take any blowback for a hard call before we will put a single person in jeopardy lets you know we will do the right thing for safety every time. In a day, we had already created additional redundancies in our backup system and a supervisory chain that makes a repeat incredibly unlikely, though I've learned to avoid never or impossible in this job for obvious reasons. Those are highlights in the year that was, but now I want to tell you some things that may blow your mind in the years to come. Recently, I traveled to Northern California to see the NASA Research Center and engage companies that make what some of the public know as air taxis, and other companies that build and operate what we call unmanned aerial systems, but you know as drones. By the 2025 Super Bowl, you may be able to get from LAX to downtown LA in a 4 or 5 person electric plane with a helicopter-like takeoff that you book like an Uber for $3 to $4 per mile. You will decide pilot or no pilot. If successful, an initial small effort will morph into thousands of these crafts. Meanwhile, there are 860,000 drones registered right now, and hobbyists own 500,000 of them. By 2025, that number balloons to nearly 3 million. And the ratio flips, so the supermajority will be commercial, mostly doing package delivery like one company I saw with a hub in Fort Worth, Texas. Its drones would fly to a home and use a descending cable to place precisely a Happy Meal-looking box with prescriptions or other small goods such as ice cream for Walgreens. However, drones fulfill countless functions, such as more safety surveying bridges and power lines, helping search and rescue efforts, and even filming movies, to name a few. Of course, in the wrong hands, they have dropped contraband into federal prisons in the US or participated in assassination attempts. So part of the FAA's work is ensuring counter-UAS work is strong so that drones aren't encroaching on airports or captured or used for nefarious purposes. Perhaps one of the more interesting aspects of my work travels was visiting a testing site for a drone company in Half Moon Bay, California. It abutted this breathtaking Pacific coastline, and as we drove on a dirt road, a longhorn decided to impede our progress. Nobody bothered to tell us that the testing site was part of a working cattle ranch. This company shot its drones into the air instead of having them take off vertically because they needed to go longer distances, as most of its work was delivering medical supplies, particularly blood, in African nations. Had they used vertical takeoff, they would lack the battery power to go far. On return, these drones, going 40 miles an hour, were caught like jets on an aircraft carrier as a wire, moving in sync with a 1-inch hook on the drone, connected. And these drones also save battery life by dropping packages with a miniature parachute. The FAA's statutory charge is to integrate all of these new crafts safely into the national airspace system. We're adding to the 6,000 commercial jets and the 200,000 general aviation crafts, and this doesn't include other types in development, including a hovering car that has been successfully demonstrated at various international air shows, or many more rockets. You probably know the commercial space efforts of Elon Musk's SpaceX and Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, but there are others in the field. The FAA approved nearly 70 space launches in 2022, and we expect that number to continue to rise, probably over 100 this year alone. If it surprises you we have a role in space, it's pretty robust. The FAA actually launches the launch pads, and a huge part of that inquiry is making sure things are environmentally safe under the U.S.'s National Environmental Protection Act. And that where harms occur, including from noise, by the way, we ensure they are mitigated as much as possible. We should expect more launches as the number of private astronauts and market entrants grow, as well as the payload companies who want to shoot into space. I know this sounds like I'm making it up, but many national mortuary markets want to send your loved ones' ashes into space. So luminaries such as Nichelle Nichols and James Doohan, who played Lieutenant Uhura and Scotty on Star Trek respectively, are now scooting around the final frontier right now. Never did I envision cremains, as they are called, as part of my workload. With every one of these new technologies, we have to ask, how does it end? It is incumbent on us to ensure we have the right regulatory scheme to avoid choking off innovation while maintaining our adherence to the FAA's responsibility of ensuring the safest skyways. And if any of our FAA work intrigues you, the last thing I want to leave you with is how you personally prep for how does it end. In his book On Writing, prolific master of the macabre, Stephen King explains his dramatic technique. Surprisingly, he crafts no outline, does no plotting, and definitely has no preconceived ending. King explains that he simply puts characters in difficult situations and sees how they respond. If he doesn't know how a story ends, he muses, how is the reader going to see it coming? While this approach pays dividends in horror fiction, I'd submit that letting yourself be pressed into terrible situations and seeing how you respond under pressure as a life strategy would be a real horror, and I'm sure your parents would like you to avoid that. It's why one of the most common questions in Hollywood is, how does it end? Because the answer foretells success. And no, this isn't a jeremiad against spontaneity. Some of the best moments in your life will be when you step out of the door on a whim, jump on a plane to a country unknown to you, and try to mingle with the locals. Likewise, I'm not saying rigidly live in a column. I know it seems peculiar to hear an aviation guy say this, but most lives are sailboats, tacking back and forth toward a point on the horizon. Few people ever travel a straight line, so the key is planning perpetual forward motion. If you live to be 80, you have 4,000 weeks to elevate the purpose and people in your life. So plan your work. Work your plan. How? First, maybe reverse engineer from your own end. Maybe it's ridiculous to mentally etch an epitaph at your age, but why not? Wouldn't the impression of others at that point be the ultimate testament to your character? President Harry Truman once said that the best tombstone he saw simply said, "Here lies Jack Williams. he did his damnedest. Now, be a bit more specific, but keep the character component and the moxie. Next, plan for your network. Nobody does it alone. Find those of like mind with comparable passions or complementary pursuits in your peer group, those who are where you are in the moment. Know it's okay if they change. Some people will be with you for a season, not a lifetime. One of producer Tyler Perry's best snippets of wisdom comes from space exploration, coincidentally. He notes that some people in your life are like boosters on a rocket. At a certain altitude, the boosters fall off, and the remaining rockets fire anew. Some people won't be able to handle your altitude. It doesn't make them bad people. It just means you need to be okay ascending when they've come with you as far as they can go. But always make sure you have at least one mentor and mentee at all times, preferably more, so that there is someone who can help pull you forward as you do the same for someone else. Third, plan your community. Wherever you live, work, and play, plan for how you will engage those communities, no matter to what you devote your time. This will be grounding that lets you see more broadly than any specific project you undertake. Ensure that community is as diverse as you can make it. Old adages live on because there is much truth in them, like this one: variety is the spice of life. Finally, I want to add a special extra step if you intend to pursue a legal career. Plan for how you advocate with integrity. The law is a tool for making the finished product. It's not the finished product itself. Yes, on occasion the law can be clear, but the vagaries of the English language are where lawyers gain value and where you show how you know the difference between using a flame to craft glass and using it to burn down the house. Former IU law professor Craig Bradley was once asked why the Supreme Court didn't just expound at length with crystalline clarity in its opinions so that litigants didn't have to continue to fight and keep coming back. And he replied, because every ambiguous Supreme Court opinion is a tank of gas for your Mercedes. Now, he was being facetious, of course, but he was acknowledging that it is when linguistic and maybe even moral imprecision are the greatest that a lawyer's skill is most valued and when his character is in the crucible. 3 retired umpires are reminiscing, boasting over traditional Wabash refreshments, beer, of course. The first says, "I was the best because I had eagle eyes and I called them like I saw them." The second umpire replies, "No, I was the best because I called them like they were." The third umpire laughs and says, "Gents, they weren't nothing till I called them." That is American law. You help the judges see. What I can assure you all today is that if you make your way to the FAA, I can answer, how does it end? With you having immense pride that you did invaluable work for the nation during an indispensable time, and you made Wabash proud. Thank you.